Center.
The remnants of Hurricane George are still dumping torrential rains on parts of the southeast, and we're watching for the possibility of severe weather in the Central Plains. Good evening and welcome to Weather Center. I'm Christina Abernathy. For the latest on the rain in the southeast, let's go to Mike Seidel in the Forecast Center.
And George has been downgraded to a tropical depression. The winds are backing off, but we're still dealing with a lot of heavy rain, flooding, and a risk of tornadoes and severe weather through the early hours of Wednesday morning. We'll have a complete update here. We'll analyze the situation, and then we'll have a full wrap-up of George, which has been around now for 2 weeks. And it may end up to be the costliest hurricane on record. We'll have to see if it ends up being costlier than Andrew from 1992. First, though, let's take a look back 48 hours, and you can see as George moved through the Florida Keys, it came out into the Gulf of Mexico over the weekend, intensified to 110 miles an hour, and then made landfall near Ocean Springs. And now the steering winds are taking it almost due east, and that's a good sign, especially for those of you in southern Mississippi, southern Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle, because it has been very, very wet, upwards of 2 feet plus of rain, 25, 26 inches in some areas of rainfall, and we're continuing to deal with the flooding tonight because all that water has had to go down into the rivers. As a result, we continue to see the rainfall running off, and it's heading down towards the Gulf. In the meantime, rivers are rising. We'll check some of those coming up. Here's our infrared picture from this evening, and you can see the movement of what was George, now just a tropical depression moving off to the east. We're still getting a pretty good inflow of moisture, so those of you in southern and central parts of Georgia, look out. Heavy rainfalls continuing and the risk of severe weather and tornadoes and flash flooding. Now, we do have that low on the map. That is our symbol for a tropical depression, a tropical low. And there's still a pretty good wind flow coming in from the Gulf of Mexico, and that's transporting moisture on shore. Also, it's still causing problems along the coast, and because of that, the Weather Service does have a coastal flood watch up across this area for the overnight hours from Apalachicola over to Crystal River. We're still getting enough onshore component of the wind that's acting to pile the water up and lead to higher than average tides, but certainly nothing like the surge we had over the past couple days as George made landfall. The other aspect I mentioned, severe weather, this tornado watch has been reissued, extended east. Those of you in Jacksonville, Tallahassee, Savannah, and the lower half of Georgia under a tornado watch until 5 in the morning. Now, we don't have any current warnings as of the top of the hour, but if there are issued, we'll get them to you as quickly as possible. And most of you on cable will get them with the red screen. Here's the southeast radar. You can still see that general cyclonic spin and the lowest pressure sitting back here with the depression. It is generally moving off to the east, but at least it's picking up some movement to the east, and that's getting rain out of the panhandle area of Florida. Meanwhile, we've got rain generally south of I-20. It's like a brick wall. Those of you north side of Atlanta staying dry, south of Atlanta to Macon to Albany, over to Augusta, very heavy rains. And these isolated bright colors are the areas where you could experience a tornado or two this evening. We will keep you updated there. Meanwhile, the best news is it's drying out around Mobile and Baldwin counties, over towards Santa Rosa, Okaloosa, and those areas in western Florida. And that is the best thing we can hope for because there's been way too much rain over the past couple of days. Upwards, as I said, of 20 to 25 inches. In fact, some of the official reporting stations up to 17.5 in Crestview, Florida. Because of that, we still have flood watches continuing overnight. And remember, the #1 safety tip, if you're out driving, you come across some water across the road, turn around, go the other way. You don't know how deep the water is, and you could lose your life. In fact, most people lose their lives in flash flooding when they're in their automobiles. Of course, we'll keep you updated with a check of the radars consistently throughout this evening across Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. Well, it has been 2 weeks since we first started talking about George. Tonight, after more than $1 billion in damage and more than 300 deaths, the storm is finally winding down. Tonight, the Weather Channel's Dennis Smith has this look back.
Saturday, September 19th, saw George move into the big time, a hurricane, making its way across the islands of the Caribbean. It left 5 dead, thousands homeless, and widespread power outage to Guadeloupe, Anguilla, St. Kitts, and Nevis. By Monday night, Puerto Rico was rushing to finalize preparations for an assault by winds up to 115 miles per hour. One day later, 3 people were dead on Puerto Rico. Damage estimated at least $2 billion. 17,000 people left homeless. George took a full day to make its way through Hispaniola on its most murderous run. At least 300 people were killed in the countries of Dominican Republic and Haiti. 90% of the Dominican Republic's banana and other plantations were destroyed. Damage estimated at over $1 billion. On Wednesday, the 23rd, the hurricane was in motion away from Haiti, its intensity down to 75 miles per hour, but still a definite threat. Thursday, George's slow march across Cuba brought massive flooding to the island. Nearly 20,000 homes were flooded in one province alone. 5 people lost their lives. There's severe damage to the country's sugar, coffee, and banana crops. Friday, George's intensity was up to 105 miles per hour, and it was the United States' turn to face the hurricane's assault. The Keys were swamped by the hurricane's wind-blown rain and storm surge. 1,500 homes were damaged or destroyed. Not everyone heeded the warnings to leave the Keys for safety on the mainland. However, only 1 death was reported. George's northwest motion spared Miami from major destruction, though the city still was hit with high winds and heavy rain. Saturday, George moved into the Gulf for a second run into the United States. The warm waters allowed the hurricane's intensity to build again to 110 miles per hour. The rush was now on across the Gulf Coast to batten down and evacuate low-lying areas. George's advance could be seen in the building waves at Pensacola, Florida. By Sunday night, the path of George was clear. It would take its strongest hit at Mississippi and Alabama. Monday saw landfall near Biloxi. Wind gusts in excess of 100 miles per hour were reported, whipping waves of water that filled parking lots and flooded buildings. To the east, Florida's panhandle was reeling from at least 20 inches of flooding rain. To the west of landfall, New Orleans was buffeted by wind and rain later in the day, but nowhere near the strength feared. Monday and Tuesday found Mississippi and Alabama still under heavy rain. Mobile, Alabama saw its worst flooding in 50 years. The storm surge pushed its way into the downtown business district as streets became rivers. The remnants of George won't go away soon. The surge could still last for days. Even so, survival procedures appeared to work. As of Tuesday, there were only 4 deaths in the Gulf region connected to the savage, long-lived Hurricane George.
And that was Dennis Smith with a wrap-up of Hurricane George. Once again, recapping now, depression still producing heavy rains and the risk of tornadoes. We will keep you updated. Of course, if you're away from your TV set, you can always get the latest on George and the weather around the globe at the Weather Channel online service at weather.com. Now back to the studio, the rest of the current weather and your Wednesday forecast. Here's Christina Abernathy.
All right, thanks, Mike. And a reminder that this Weather Center is sponsored by Jeanne. A look at the big picture out there. We have some other areas that are getting some wet weather besides the deep south. We've got rain and storms moving through the plain states associated with this low, and then another low back to the west, giving you some rather soggy weather. And we do have the threat of severe weather. Of course, Mike told you about the tornado watch here, but we also have a severe thunderstorm watch in effect for a good chunk of Kansas. And we have some pretty nasty storms out there in Barton County and eastern Rush counties. You're under severe thunderstorm warnings. Take cover immediately if you live here. And another round of rain and storms for you in the northeastern part of the state. It was a bit of a rough night for Kansas City, and we are looking at more wet weather in store and the potential for storminess tonight. We also see some wet weather in the west with the other area of low pressure here. You can see the rain sort of rotating around that, and again, showers and maybe some storms here. So wet weather possible anywhere that you see shaded in green, and that includes you in the upper Midwest and parts of New England. Now keep in mind that some of this could be in the form of strong and even severe storms. Look out especially in the areas that we have shaded in red. Well, into the forecast we go, and we'll start you out in the northeast where your lows dropping down into the 50s here, maybe down to 47 in Burlington. And we will see rain, we think. Syracuse, Burlington, Caribou, so not the nicest start to your day. Here to the south, Boston, New York, partly cloudy to mostly cloudy in the 50s. Rain and storms, some of those storms could be rather rough here through southern Georgia and into northern Florida. Look out around Savannah, maybe Jacksonville. But contrast that with what you'll see here to the west. Sunny skies in Dallas and Houston, lows in the upper 60s to the low 70s. Chicago, partly cloudy at 59, but watch out for the storms in Kansas City. And finally to the west. For George,
The remnants of Hurricane George are spreading rain across the southeast as the storm continues its trek back toward the Atlantic Ocean. Good evening and welcome to this edition of Weather Center. I'm Terry Smith. We are also going to update you on the thunderstorms in the Central Plains, but first, let's go to the Forecast Center where Mike Seidel is standing by.
And Terry, we want to get you updated tonight across the southeast. We still have a lot of heavy rainfall from what's left of George, now a tropical depression, and the risk of tornadoes overnight. We'll check your radars, and then we'll wrap up this segment from the desk with an entire look back at the length and the life of George, which has been obviously a very devastating hurricane. First, though, check out the current satellite loop, and you can see that what's left of George is on the move now off to the east and east-northeast. And because it's moving faster than it was this time yesterday, and because it has weakened somewhat, we're not going to see those prolific rainfall amounts across Georgia and the northeast Florida panhandle tonight. But you can see we still have a real strong fetch or a flow of moisture into these areas, and we still have spin in the atmosphere. So that's why we think there is that possibility of some tornadoes isolated. But that risk continues overnight. The dry air wraps in on the west side, and it is getting better by the moment across the western parts of the Florida panhandle. So good news all around. I-10, by the way, is now completely reopened. A stretch of that was still closed today in Baldwin County. That's northeast of Mobile in Alabama. So now you can drive I-10 all you want, and you don't have to worry about it being closed. There's a surface map or a tropical low, the isobars, lines of equal barometric pressure. Notice the pressure gradient or the change in pressure over a specific area isn't as tight. Remember a couple of days ago we had a lot of these isobars around our hurricane then tropical storm, but we still have an onshore flow and that wind is still piling up the water somewhat. So look out in these areas for some higher than average tides tonight, maybe into the first part of Wednesday, but at least for most of you, the water is backing off as well as those high seas, and that means the beach erosion is certainly winding down, and there's been quite a bit of that to the beaches of the Florida Panhandle over towards Biloxi and Gulfport. Tornado watch overnight, as I mentioned, the risk of a few isolated tornadoes. However, over the past couple of hours, some great news. We've had no tornado warnings. However, some big storms still firing up across eastern Georgia, and still that rotation. We have this one feeder band still bringing rains, and that'll be moving in towards the Tallahassee area. The heavier rainfalls the next couple of hours. Look out for downpours there, and then all the rain now in eastern parts of Georgia. Let's take a closer look at that radar. And you can see the rains now from Valdosta over towards Waycross, and very heavy rainfalls now north of Waycross right up towards I-16. That's through Pierce, Appling, and up towards Toombs and Emmanuel counties in Georgia. And this is all heading over towards the Savannah River Valley. So Augusta, a rainy night. Some of this rain heading over towards Savannah and Columbia through the Midlands of South Carolina. However, it is avoiding Atlanta like a plague, and these are areas where it's been very dry most of the summer, and it would be nice to see some of this rain. By the way, the rainfall totals here about 2 to 4 inches, so there may be some localized flooding. Some of you, as we'll show you, are under flash flood watches, but nothing like we saw in the Florida Panhandle, where we've had upwards of 20 to 25 inches of rain. It is getting better tonight. Pensacola, Okaloosa, Santa Rosa, Escambia County, counties looking drier. Baldwin and Mobile counties, not bad. Over towards Biloxi and Gulfport, where George came on shore. The rain is over with and the cleanup can get underway. Also, the winds have died down, so power crews can get back out and clean up. There are your flood watches, and we've got them from Augusta down towards Savannah, over towards Charleston and Hilton Head, and again those areas in Georgia where you've had heavy rainfalls and there's still some more rain falling. Now, don't forget, this water has to go somewhere, and the rivers have been cresting today. These are the rivers that crested today. The water is running down towards the Gulf of Mexico. Notice some of these crests, like on the Big Coldwater Creek, 10 feet above flood stage. So it's going to take a while for the water to recede. So if you're in a flood-prone area, you may still have another day or so before you can get back and be safe. But looking down the road tomorrow and Thursday, the Leaf River cresting on Thursday, the Blackwater River forecasted to crest tomorrow 13 feet above flood stage. And remember, the safety tip is always, the best safety tip is to not cross river on a roadway, especially at night if you can't see the road. If it's covered up with water, turn around, go the other way. And remember, seek higher ground if you're in one of those flood-prone areas, especially near one of those rivers and creeks in the Gulf Coast. We'll keep you updated throughout the night and tomorrow as the waters slowly begin to recede in most areas. Well, it's been 2 weeks since we first started talking about George. Tonight, after more than $1 billion in damages and more than 300 deaths, the storm is finally winding down. Tonight, the Weather Channel's Dennis Smith has this look back.
Saturday, September 19th, saw George move into the big time, a hurricane, making its way across the islands of the Caribbean. It left 5 dead, thousands homeless, and widespread power outage to Guadeloupe, Anguilla, St. Kitts, and Nevis. By Monday night, Puerto Rico was rushing to finalize preparations for an assault by winds up to 115 miles per hour. One day later, 3 people were dead on Puerto Rico. Damage estimated at least $2 billion. 17,000 people left homeless. George took a full day to make its way through Hispaniola on its most murderous run. At least 300 people were killed in the countries of Dominican Republic and Haiti. 90% of the Dominican Republic's banana and other plantations were destroyed. Damage estimated at over $1 billion. On Wednesday, the 23rd, the hurricane was in motion away from Haiti, its intensity down to 75 miles per hour, but still a definite threat. Thursday, George's slow march across Cuba brought massive flooding to the island. Nearly 20,000 homes were flooded in one province alone. 5 people lost their lives. There's severe damage to the country's sugar, coffee, and banana crops. Friday, George's intensity was up to 105 miles per hour, and it was the United States' turn to face the hurricane's assault. The Keys were swamped by the hurricane's wind-blown rain and storm surge. 1,500 homes were damaged or destroyed. Not everyone heeded the warnings to leave the Keys for safety on the mainland. However, only 1 death was reported. George's northwest motion spared Miami from major destruction, though the city still was hit with high winds and heavy rain. Saturday, George moved into the Gulf for a second run into the United States. The warm waters allowed the hurricane's intensity to build again to 110 miles per hour. The rush was now on across the Gulf Coast to batten down and evacuate low-lying areas. George's advance could be seen in the building waves at Pensacola, Florida. By Sunday night, the path of George was clear. It would take its strongest hit at Mississippi and Alabama. Monday saw landfall near Biloxi. Wind gusts in excess of 100 miles per hour were reported, whipping waves of water that filled parking lots and flooded buildings. To the east, Florida's panhandle was reeling from at least 20 inches of flooding rain. To the west of landfall, New Orleans was buffeted by wind and rain later in the day, but nowhere near the strength feared. Monday and Tuesday found Mississippi and Alabama still under heavy rain. Mobile, Alabama saw its worst flooding in 50 years. The storm surge pushed its way into the downtown business district as streets became rivers. The remnants of George won't go away soon. The surge could still last for days. Even so, survival procedures appeared to work. As of Tuesday, there were only 4 deaths in the Gulf region connected to the savage, long-lived Hurricane George.
And if you're thinking about heading back to the Florida Keys, we found out today that Key West will reopen to tourists and visitors a week from Friday. That's a week from Friday, October 9th. Until then, locals only. As the cleanup continues, they've got to get the power back on. Now remember, if you're away from your television set, check out the Weather Channel online service for continuous weather coverage coast to coast and around the world. Back in the studio, Terry Smith has the rest of our current weather tonight and a look at Wednesday's forecast. Terry?
Thanks, Mike. And this Weather Center is sponsored by Lowe's Home Improvement Warehouse. As we look around the rest of the country, a fairly active night, not only in the southeast, but parts of the Ohio Valley, the Central Plains, much of the western United States, all the way into Nevada. A very stormy night in some areas. Thunderstorms from earlier today are beginning to quiet somewhat, though we still have some activity just north of Nashville. That's moving off toward the south, whereas these showers here are moving off toward the east. In Cleveland, it's a possibility you might be seeing a few sprinkles. Pittsburgh, perhaps you, a little bit later on tonight as well. For the rest of the country, aside from the tornado watches in Georgia and northern Florida, we're watching the severe thunderstorm potential here, therefore a severe thunderstorm watch in Kansas. With these thunderstorms, gusty winds, hail, heavy rain, a possibility, and we've seen it throughout parts of the evening time. Some of those thunderstorms here, and then in central Kansas, all could potentially carry heavy rains and some gusty winds, so be aware of that. They're moving off toward the southeast. Kansas City, you could be looking at some of this rain moving into your region later on. And here in the west, another unsettled night with some showers moving through Colorado. Earlier, some hail accompanying some of these storms, but things quieter. Denver, you're dry right now, but the possibility of rain for you later. And Salt Lake, looking at a little bit of a wet weather situation for you, and that probably will continue through parts of the evening hours as well. Well, let's check out that forecast, and we'll be watching our tropical depression very slowly working.
And they want to get our insight into why the weather is doing what it's doing. We even show pictures.
Right now, it's your local forecast on the Weather Channel.
9 minutes before the top of the hour. It's time now to check on Storm Watch. We'll show you where the possibility stands for some strong thunderstorms as we go into the overnight. But first, a look at the tropical update, and we'll check out the very latest on George. And here we go into the southeast. Remnants of George as we are watching still some very heavy rain, and in fact a couple of pockets of heavy rain. One here into southeast Georgia, and the second one stretching back down into extreme northern Florida. And this particular batch is expected to kind of follow along the same suit and perhaps affect you into southeast Georgia, where you're already receiving some flooding problems. So if you live in a low-lying area or flood-prone area, certainly be alert for rising water as we head into the overnight. There's a look at it, and again, what's left of it is still drawing some moisture on in, and we continue to find heavy rain all the way on up to just around and south of I-20. And above that line, we really haven't seen a whole lot of rainfall. So heading into northern sections of Atlanta, it just hasn't been much of a rain producer for you. But as you head southward down I-75 toward Macon and Albany, Valdosta, and areas like that, you've really found some heavy rain. Coastal flood watches remain in effect from Apalachicola, Florida, out toward Crystal River, Florida, and still the potential for some isolated tornadoes. So the tornado watch remains in effect, and notice that takes you right on through the overnight until 5 a.m. local time. All right, there's a look at it from a radar perspective. There's the first area of heavy rain. There's the second band that I spoke of, and this is going to continue to kind of shift on eastward. You can see where the center of circulation is located, so it's generally moving off to the east, maybe east-northeast at this time. As we look at a closer inspection around the Waycross area, you've seen some of that heavier rain. Some of this is going to shift north and eastward and eventually work back up toward the Augusta area as well. Heading into Valdosta, here comes round two for you. Boy, what a wet ride here from Macon down toward Valdosta. Very wet, dangerous too if you're not used to driving in the rain, and the rain at times could greatly reduce visibilities. Again, there's a look at wet weather. This is the third band, and still seeing some rain out here toward Panama City and on up toward the Dothan area. This not as substantial as some of the other rain bands that we have seen, and fortunately this is the last in the line of it, so once we get rid of this, it'll dry out for you across the panhandle of Florida. Plenty of rain, too much rain obviously. Crestview, Florida picking up well over a foot, and the same is true into Mobile, Alabama. Biloxi picking up about an inch, 8.5 inches, so a tremendous amount of rainfall. These are some of the rainfall totals as you look at the Doppler, and you can get a very good view how it's actually portions of extreme southern Alabama into the western panhandle of Florida that have really suffered the most. Some of these pinks representing up to around 2 feet of rainfall. As we look at the rest of the Atlantic Basin, it's actually fairly quiet. There's not a whole lot to talk about here. Certainly quiet into the Gulf of Mexico, down toward the Caribbean. And as we work our way a little further out to the east, yes, there is another system out there. This is Tropical Storm Jeanne. Not a threat, though, may affect you around the Azores. Folks there, but for the most part, not going to be a factor for the U.S., and that is certainly enough to bring a sigh of relief for many folks dwelling along the coast. No doubt about that. As we go into the interior of the lower 48, we'll also find the potential for strong storms in Missouri, Kansas, into eastern Colorado, although much of the thunderstorm activity in the high plains of Colorado appears to be dying down. I showed you what's left of our tornado watch in the southeast, severe thunderstorm watch encompassing a good chunk of Kansas. There's a look at the particular radar. You can see some of these thunderstorms kind of weakening a bit in intensity if you compare it to the past couple of hours, so that's certainly a step in the right direction, but still could find some severe weather out in this particular region. And as we look at the nation as a whole, again, we're going to find very wet weather, and some of the same areas getting wet now are going to find that wet weather right on into the morning. It's going to be a wet wait at the bus stop and a wet morning commute for you here in the southeast. We'll talk more about what's left of George, and we'll give you a full history of the hurricane as it crossed across the Atlantic Basin next on Weather Center.
George has lost its status, but not its effects on the south. An update on flood and tornado watches, plus severe thunderstorms elsewhere, next on Weather Center.
This is Singing Bob saying,